later on that night, 7:00 that night, I finally got home and I went to the computer to see if I could bring up the names of the crew members at American on that flight, because I'm sure I would have known some of them. And when I brought the screen up in front of me, it was the exact same screen I had seen the day before when it had my name listed on it, except now all the names are removed.
And Mojave ground, X-ray 1, ready to check, 1, 2.
Welcome to the Naval Aviation Ready Room podcast, where the stories, leadership, and leading-edge technology of naval aviation come alive. Hosted by retired Navy Captain Ryan Keyes, this podcast takes you beyond mere museum artifacts as he delves into the personal stories, pivotal decisions, and state-of-the-art hardware that define the world's most prolific aviation force.
All right, welcome back to the Naval Aviation Ready Room podcast. Ryan Keyes, Captain, United States Navy retired, and Director of Operations and Strategy at the Naval Aviation Museum Foundation. Today's guest has lived a life that reads like a flight plan packed with adventure, service, and impact. Captain Steve Scheibner began his journey as a Navy pilot in the 1980s, flying the P-3 Orion on deployments around the world. After leaving active duty, he joined American Airlines, where he logged over 12,000 hours and now flies the Boeing 777 out of JFK, taking passengers across the Atlantic and beyond. But Steve's story doesn't stop in the cockpit. He went on to earn advanced degrees in theology, plant a thriving church in Maine, and develop training rooted in Navy core values that's reached more than 10,000 service members. He's also a husband, father of 8, and mentor to countless young leaders. Today we'll talk about his career in the Navy and commercial aviation, his passion for shaping character, and what it means to take lessons from the Ready Room and carry them into every area of life. And I will say that Captain Steve is the biggest name that we've had so far here on the Ready Room podcast. And really the only reason why it happened is I have to thank Kyle Kozad, retired 2-star admiral who is the president and CEO of the foundation, who I understand you were squadron mates together in Maine in your first VP squadron. So again, Captain Steve, thank you for joining us today in the Ready Room.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited. When you look on YouTube and you go to anything aviation, your face pops up just how you look right now. And it's great because if anyone hasn't seen him on YouTube, you need to get on there and definitely your analysis and your very insightful commentary on whether it's mishaps or flying the 777 or differences is outstanding. There's a reason why you have over 800,000 followers for sure. And in your character, your energy comes through the videos. So again, thank you for joining us today. Hopefully it'll maybe increase our rank in the aviation podcast.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope our audience throws some love your way as well. And yeah, thanks for that. It's the whole Captain Steve thing is rather new to us. We only started about 12 months ago at it, and no pun intended, but the channel took off. And part of it is we're trying to be informational, educational, and a little bit snarky when we can be. Some of the incidents and accidents we talk about are very serious, but the ones that are more lighthearted, we throw a lot of humor in, and people seem to enjoy that. I like telling stories and telling jokes. And so let's start talking and telling stories.
Yeah, I love it. So I want to kind of harken back to, like you said, your time in when you first got in the Navy and got winged. So yeah, just tell me that why is it that, did you grow up loving aviation? Why is it naval aviation that you chose? Why VP? Because I'll be honest with you, when I was going through flight school and I was in VT3 in primary, and they give us a little 3x5 index card on where you write down what you want to select. I put P3s, 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 and P3s, and I got helicopters.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just the needs of the Navy, right? So yeah. Correct. So how is it that you entered the VP community?
So I was, the year was 1982, and I was graduating from college, and the job market was really tight. Ronald Reagan was president back then, and he was going to, if you recall, double the size of the Navy. And so as I tell people, and this is actually half a joke, but half the truth, they lowered the standards significantly for about 3.5 years while they were trying to entice more pilots to come on board. And I was looking for a job, so it was perfect timing. I went down to the recruiter. My best friend went to the Naval Academy. So he was the guy that was like light years ahead of me, right? From the time he was 13 years old, he knew what he wanted to do. I was just a knucklehead trying to get through life. And when I graduated from college, I had a good time in college, didn't get the best grades, but did enjoy my experience.
Happens to the best
He
of us.
said to me, go down to the recruiter and tell him you want to be a pilot. So I did. I walked down to the recruiter in Philadelphia and I walked in after some small talk. He said, what do you think you want to do? And I said, very confidently, I want to be a pilot.
Sure.
And he laughed at me. He looked at me and he said, you and 40,000 other guys. And I said,
wow.
well, I don't want 40,000 other slots. I only want one. So he said, he goes, well, I like the attitude. He goes, let's see what we can do for you. Got to take the tests. And so they had a test called the AQT FAR.
Yep.
Not sure what it's called these days. And I went in, I took the test and I aced the test. I did very well on it. It's kind of like an IQ test, right? It's just like general knowledge stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So he was all excited. So he had me come back down. He said, hey, Steve, you did really well on the test. Let's talk about getting you into the pilot program. Well, then once he got a hold of my college transcript, his tone changed a little bit. And he said, you had a good time in college. I said, in fact, I did. So they put me in he put in a package for me to become an NFO, Naval Flight Officer. Now, no insults to my NFO buddies, but that's the way it worked back then. I'm not in control of those things. I got accepted to be a SNFO, a Student Naval Flight Officer. I went down to Pensacola, Florida, was there about a month going through Aviation Officer Candidate School, when a couple of my other classmates said, why don't you just transition over to be a pilot? Do you have 20/20 vision? I said, yeah. And so it was just a single form you filled out while you were there. I filled it out, got a couple signatures. About a week later, I was in the pilot program. So almost everything in my life I've like semi-backed into. I absolutely backed into being a pilot in the Navy, but I've loved it ever since.
That's a great story, actually. I think your willingness to join at whatever cost it was. I want to be a pilot. Hey, I'll be an NFO too. Sure. And then it come down here and then into, Pensacola, the cradle of naval aviation, and to go, no, I'm going to keep my pilot dreams alive and I'm going to go ahead and switch over. So, wow.
Yeah,
better be lucky than good sometimes, right?
Absolutely. There you go. Lucky than good.
Yeah. Did you struggle through flight school or because, you probably did really well.
I loved it.
Yeah.
See, so, part of the problem with how we recruit pilots is this. Back then, like I said, it's half a joke that they lowered the standards, but when they were trying to hire more pilots, they were looking at a broader range of people and personalities and backgrounds. Pilots tend to be doers, right? Where engineers tend to be thinkers. Now, engineers are going to get a 4.0 grade point average and they're going to blow away the academics, but the way they process is different than a pilot. Engineers or thinkers in particular, when there's some sort of a incident that they have to react to, they're going to want to go back to the beginning and line up all their dominoes and start over again. When you're in an airplane that's going 600 miles an hour, you got to know your procedures, but you got to pick it up right from that moment and work forward. So doers, idea people, dreamers fit into that category a little bit better than your classic thinker. And I'm an absolute doer. So I was really very good at I loved all of my student flights. I really took to it. Once I could put my hands on the aircraft, I just fell in love with it.
Wow. That's a great way to think about it. I've never really thought about pilots versus engineers kind of like that. And then I guess you kind of have a mix too of test pilots who kind of can do both possibly. So
yes,
I definitely was not one of those.
That's a good blend. Right?
Yeah. I was not an engineer. I was an English major. So yeah.
Yeah.
And
there
still
you go.
made it through. Right.
Yep.
So you got to VP land up in Maine. Did you choose Maine? You're originally from the Northeast. Is that correct?
Correct. So I met my wife in Pennsylvania in college, and then the Navy starts to move you around. And we wanted to go back up in the Northeast. I think mostly because that's home and that's what we knew.
Mm-hmm.
Brunswick, Maine is beautiful. It's a great place to go. So we filled out that dream sheet. I got props, which is what I wanted to do. Then the next step is, where do you want to get based? Moffett Field? Do you want to get Jacksonville? Do you want to get Brunswick? We put down Brunswick. We got Brunswick, and we moved up there in 1984, late 1984. and I joined VP-23 at that time, and they were 3 weeks away from going on deployment. So it was baptism by immersion for sure. Baptism by fire. I jumped right into the squadron as a knowing nothing, as a no-P. And 3 weeks later, I'm on an airplane going over to Rota and Lodges for a 6-month deployment.
That's awesome. And primarily doing, so this is height of the Cold War time frame.
Right.
So ASW, like every day, trying to, search, detect, submarines and track them throughout the time. So that's probably some pretty exciting flying and missions at the time too.
Well, it was, and you said it well. It was the height of the Cold War, and Ronald Reagan's mission was to put his thumb on the Soviet Union and just keep the pressure on them. And he did that not only rhetorically, but he did it through the mission of the Navy and the Air Force. And so, we tracked Soviet submarines all the time. So they'd send subs out of the North Fleet. They'd come down in the Mediterranean. I think back in the day, there was probably 5 or 6 Soviet subs patrolling the Mediterranean at any one point in time. So we would track them coming in while they were in the Med, track them going out and back up. And that type of pressure kept them, they had to keep deploying, they had to keep spending money, they had to keep all those things going. And it was that constant pressure on them from above. And it was a real mission. There was a lot of, Top Gun came out in 1986 or 7, and they had to kind of create a mission. Both Top Gun movies, they've had to kind of create a mission, but there wasn't a war going on at the time, so it was like a manufactured thing. What we did in the P3 community was real world, real-time intelligence that was going right straight back to Washington, D.C., because you want to know where all those Soviet boomers are with all their nuclear weapons. You want to keep track of them at all times.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I always said, ASW these days is a very underrated mission. It's like it was at its height in the Cold War when I came into the Navy and started flying H-60 Foxtrots with dipping sonar and buoy capability in 1998, 99 after the Cold War. But still Russian submarines were a thing back then. Now, because of their, economic issues and building issues and Navy issues, they've gone down. But we still treat it as a very important mission. But when the GWAT, Global War on Terrorism started, it kind of ASW kind of went out the door, and they had P3s flying over land doing, missions, that way. So yeah, kind of different.
Well, and for your audience, ASW is anti-submarine warfare.
Yes.
And I loved that mission because there was a crew of, I think it was 12 of us all together on the aircraft. And everybody at each one of their computer stations had a little piece of the puzzle. And it was, tracking a submarine is more of an art form than it is a science. There is a lot of science behind it, but you get a feel for it after a while to do it effectively and do it well. And that's the art of communication with everybody on the airplane. Some people are naturally more forthcoming with information. Other people are more introverted. So as a mission commander, you had to be on the ICS while you're flying the airplane, talking to people in the back. Hey, come on, talk to me. Tell me what you see. What's the trend? What are you looking at? And once you get that put together, you're tracking a Soviet submarine in real time. And I just love the mission. I loved being in with other people rather than maybe being single piloted. And there's some advantages of being single piloted. But then, who do you get your story right with after you land? And I had 12. I had 12 guys to, we could make a better story afterwards.
That's right. Oh, that's funny. So a couple, or I guess quite a few operational deployments in your short time there in VP-23, and then move on to shore duty after that. Where did you end up going for that?
So I did 3 deployments altogether at VP-23, and then I moved on and at that point I had kind of sort of made the decision of which direction I wanted to go, whether I was going to make the Navy a career or not. And it's a very family decision. Loved the opportunities I had in the Navy. Could have very easily made that a full career for 20 plus years, but then decided I think I wanted to go to the airlines. The airlines were hiring like crazy. It was just a better opportunity for my family, and staying in the Naval Reserve was like the best of both worlds, right? So we went down to Corpus Christi, Texas, and I flew King Airs down there, T-44s, in Advanced Training Command, helping, and students there they had done their primary training in the T-34. They're now in, twin engine airplane, getting their wings out of that. And the hardest check ride I ever got as a student was that final check ride before you earned your wings. And now I was the guy delivering that check ride to students. And it was designed to be overwhelming. And if they could withstand an overwhelming check ride, and they absolutely earned their wings.
Yeah, for sure. That is, I mean, just think how many men and women did you make into naval aviators?
Right.
Yeah, the impact that you had
Yeah,
there.
and you
That's
too.
awesome.
Those wings of gold are. I don't want to get too misty about this.
Go ahead.
It's a very elite club, and you've got to keep the standard high. And so I think everybody all these years has kept a very high standard. They don't just hand those things out; you earn them.
Sir, yes, sir. 100% agree. So you go down there, decide to get out, separate, and then go reserves. And then you start your kind of application process, for the airlines. Why American Airlines?
Well, like I said, everything in my life I've backed into. So, at some point you're in the T-44 community down there, and it's like the airline training squadron. Everybody in front of you is they're putting out an application to Delta, United, American, and they're all getting picked off. Delta had the most streamlined process at the time. And from the time you got your first interview to the time they hired you was about 3 weeks. American was less streamlined. I think it was 6 to 8 weeks before you'd get a acceptance letter. I put in an application at Delta. I had a great resume. I was an instructor pilot, blue card holder in the P-3, all the right boxes checked, mission commander, all the right stuff, right? And the 9 pilots in front of me at my squadron down there in Corpus Christi all got hired by Delta. So I was going to be number 10.
Oh,
right?
yeah, why not?
I had as
Top
good a
10.
resume or better. And I couldn't even get an interview at Delta. So
Wow.
I was shocked. And so I immediately redid my thing, got more recommendation letters, sent it in again. I got turned down twice, even just for an interview. Well, what was happening internally at Delta at that point was they weren't pumping the brakes on hiring. They put the parking brake on.
Oh, wow.
They had kind of come to a screeching halt on hiring. American was still hiring. They would hire for another year. So I went through the whole slower process with American, got an offer. It was my only offer with a major airline, but I would have picked American, Delta, United at the time. I would have picked them all equally. When I was doing my interview at American, they said, "Why do you want to work here?" And I said, "Well, in 30 years, I think there's going to be 3 airlines: American, Delta, and United." And obviously, I think American's the best because I'm in front of them. And now, 34 years later, I'm at the tail end of that career.
Well, you got a crystal ball. You should have bought a lottery ticket that day because those are essentially the 3 majors along with, Southwest and Alaska. So, but the largest 3 out of all the majors or legacy airlines. So, wow. Okay. Why did you decide to stay in the reserves and not fly necessarily in the reserves?
Well, see, I absolutely loved the Navy, and I loved the P-3. So I did fly for the P-3 out of Willow Grove.
Oh, you did?
For
Okay.
probably the first 7 or 8 years in the
Okay.
reserves. But then I transitioned to a different job, and that prolonged my status. So like most pilots that go to the reserves, you're thinking, well, I'll hang out here until I get my 20, and then I'll qualify for my retirement, and then I'll move on to whatever's next. I was at 8 years when I got off active duty. I got a job at a squadron in Willow Grove. Here's how I back into everything in my life. I was there about 4 months, the new guy, and the skipper comes down at an all hands meeting and he says, "Well, folks, we just got the word from Washington, D.C. We're being decommissioned.
Oh.
And in 6 months from now, everybody's going to have to be going someplace else, but we're no longer going to exist." So I had just gotten there, and all the senior guys started peeling off and going to different squadrons or retiring and going and doing whatever they were going to do next. I said, "Well, I'm going to hang out here till the end, and then I'll make my choice." About 5 months into the 6 months of the decommissioning, skipper came back and said, "Hey, we got a letter from Washington, D.C. It says they've taken us off the chopping block. We're going to be around." And I was like the last man standing. I was
No
like one
kidding.
of the senior pilots at that point. So I became the NATOPS officer. I was the guy I was the only instructor pilot in the whole squadron for a long time, and I was at the top of that heap. So I love that. Did a lot of great missions. The reserves in the 90s and into the early 2000s were becoming more like active duty in the sense that they were filling a much larger and larger role, supplementing the active duty. So I did a bunch of years where I worked 180 days of drilling days with the reserves, and it was like being on active duty. I was there 4 days a week, almost every week. So it was a full on commitment, mostly because I just loved the Navy and I didn't want to give it up. But at the end of flying around 2000, I was right at the 18-year mark, 18 and a half year mark, and just kind of coasting to get to 20 when I decided to move up to Brunswick, Maine. Now, this was back to Maine as a civilian now. I had an opportunity to start a church. So that's not something that everybody can say that they've had that opportunity. Um, yeah, but I had gone to seminary while I was down in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, got a master's degree in theology, and some old friends of ours up in Maine said, "Hey, would you consider moving back to Maine to help us start a church?" And I took them up on that, and we moved back to Maine.
I'll just say right now, a leap of faith, if you put it
It's
that
a
way,
leap
right?
of faith, for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah. A
Yes.
little dad joke thrown in there.
Yep. No, that's
Um,
good. That's a good one.
Yeah, thanks. You said you just backed into everything, but then there's another saying I've heard. It says, "Luck is the residual of preparedness,"
Mhm.
and I'm sure that's what you have done your whole life, right? You've
Yeah,
prepared, you've done well.
let's go with that. That sounds better
Yeah.
than but I'm telling you, I have stumbled into and backed into some of the most wonderful things in my life, and
Okay.
they weren't planned ahead of time. But
Uh,
yeah,
so
right,
now you're essentially juggling 3 careers:
right.
Naval Reserve officer, commander in the Naval Reserves. I assume now you're not a captain yet at
Nope,
when you moved up there, still a first
right.
officer
First
for
officer.
American. And what did
Yep.
you start off as? What aircraft?
I started out as an
7-3?
engineer on the 727, but I was only on that for about 4 or 5 months, and then I upgraded to the right seat of the 767, and I was on
Oh,
that for 23 and a half years.
wow. Okay, great.
Yep.
And then also now establishing a church
Correct.
and trying to
Right.
build that flock, right? That community.
Right.
And oh, by the way, sorry, number 4, raising your family over
Yeah.
here with you and your
Yep.
wife having 8 children.
Yep.
Doing all that at
Right.
once.
So all of that, there's lots of overlap in my life. And so those things all overlapped one another at the 3 jobs at the time. And it actually worked out quite well because at American, I would bid reserve and there was a lot of stagnation in those years. They weren't hiring pilots. So I was at the bottom of the stack. So I actually couldn't hold anything but reserve. And on reserve, you're on call to fill in for somebody that can't make it to work. Either they're sick or for whatever reason. But you work about half as much. So you get paid a regular salary, but you work about 50% as much. With that being said, it was a perfect job for starting a church. Now, churches in northern New England, it's kind of a remote community. There's not a lot of money to pay a pastor to come in. Ideally, you get somebody that's bivocational. They've got a day job, and then on the evenings and the weekends, they work as the pastor of a church. I had the ideal job for that because I could basically be around about 23 days a month, and the church wouldn't have to pay me a salary. So getting off the ground with the church, no pun intended there.
Uh-huh.
Getting off the ground with the church uh, was uh, was an advantage because I had that day job. So we did decide. We prayed about it. We decided to move back to Maine. We uprooted everybody, the whole family, and moved back up there and planted Cornerstone Baptist Church in Topsom, Maine, in July of 2000. And that was a wonderful experience. It's the most challenging job I've ever had. And I tell people I've been in airplanes with engines on fire. I've had multiple emergencies over the years and the stress that goes with that. Nothing compares to the challenges and the stress that goes with being a pastor in northern New England. And it was extremely rewarding all at the same time. So I love that. But we planted the church. The first Sunday we had 28 people there. It was a few families that wanted to help get started.
Uh-huh.
Most of the rest, everybody was related to me because I have a big
Start with family first, right?
But, when people started coming out week after week, they liked it. They would join. The church started to grow. About a year into it, we're at about 100 people attending, which is a very, very, reassuring size for a church, especially at that age. And we just kept moving along. I was there for 10 years, really enjoyed it. But at the end of 10 years, I realized it was time to kind of hand it over to the next person for 2 reasons. One is the airline was taking more and more time, but I had been asked to write a leadership class for the Navy, and it was taking on a life of its own. And that course which started out very modestly in the beginning. All of a sudden, I'm traveling all over the world, being asked to come and teach this class. So you got your obligations at American, you got your obligations at the church, and now in between, I'm trying to fit in travel to go all over the place and teach a course.
So essentially you had to separate one from all
Correct.
that, and it was the church that did it. Or that, like you said, though, you passed it on, to somebody else to
Yep.
shepherd it along, right?
Correct. Right.
So tell me a little bit about your leadership class and kind of what that was about. Why were you selected to do it? What was your interest in doing it? And then we'll kind of swing back to the American Airlines.
So all the intersections of my life kind of came together in this course. I had that master's degree in theology. I'd actually gotten another master's degree since in counseling. And I was working on the staff up in Brunswick now for an active duty Commodore. And I actually loved that job. I wasn't flying anymore for the Navy, but I was an executive on his staff. And he liked having me because I was a part-timer that he could give pet projects to that he didn't have to, I don't want to say this wrong, waste somebody else's time with. He could give it to me and I could take a month and go research something, come back on my next drill weekend and hand him a report or, whatever, for what he wanted. So he liked having me. I loved being kind of back in the active duty world again. So I wasn't drilling on weekends anymore, like a drilling reservist. I was actually integrating with the active troops. And being a pastor of a church locally to that base, it was ideal. I was having interaction with local young people and everything. So, and many of them wandered out to the church. It was good. So it was one of those times where I had a report to hand in to him and I was sitting in his outer office waiting to get called in. It was a few minutes past my appointment time and he was a very punctual guy. About 15 minutes late, two folks come out of his office, a man and a woman, both enlisted in the Navy, and they looked miserable, like they had been crying. And I got called in a minute later, and I looked at the Commodore, and his name's AJ Johnson, and I'm looking at him, and he looks miserable, like he's upset. So I think it was the pastor in me that kind of came out, and I just kind of instinctively said, is everything okay? And he said, no, not really. He said, I just had to fire those two. And I said, well, what did they do? And what he said next kind of changed the direction of my life. Well, even to this day. So he said, well, they're married to each other. They have a 9-month-old child. They decided to go out to dinner and shopping. They left the 9-month-old at home alone, no babysitter. The neighbor heard the baby crying. After a while, they looked out, no car in the driveway. They knocked on the door, no answer. They called the police, who called the fire department. They broke down the door. The baby was fine. But 3 hours later, this couple comes waltzing through the door. And the whole Navy is there to meet him when they walk through the door, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And so they get confronted with their irresponsibility. And it was their response that caught everybody off guard. Their response was, hey, what's the big deal? Why are you coming down on us? The baby's fine. And after all, everybody else does this. You're just picking on us. And that put everybody back on their heels.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you know, Ryan, the Navy has a very elaborate discipline system that they'll put people through to get their thinking right.
For sure.
So these two went through the whole gauntlet, right? They went to see the Master Chief, and then they went through XOI, and then they went to Captain's Mast. So the Commodore, the guy I worked for, said I was the last appointment before the unemployment office for them. And he said, I was just looking for them to be a little repentant.
Mm-hmm.
And he said they weren't. He said they were just as dug in with me as they had been with everybody all along. And he said, at that point, I had no choice but to let him go. And it really broke his heart. This was a great guy to work for. He took it personally, and he said, he felt like it was a failure of the system. The system had somehow let these two down. Now, at that point, he's looking at me, and I, as you can tell, I have a natural smirk on my face. I got in a lot of trouble in grade school. And he goes, all right, Scheibner, why are you laughing at me? And I said, well, I'm not laughing at you, sir. I said, but you've asked the same question about 10 different ways. And he said, well, what is that? I said, you keep asking why. And I said, if you haven't noticed, now this is back in 2001, I said, the fundamental question of life has changed from why to why not. And I said, our young couple's asking a fundamentally different question than you're asking. They're not asking why. They're asking why not. It's what I call the new virtue these days. The new virtue isn't whether you should or shouldn't do something. It's whether you can or can't. Is it legal? Will I get away with it? How much trouble will I get into? How much will it cost me to get out of it? Those are the questions that most people ask these days. Soldiers and sailors should be asking the should questions of like, should I do this? Is this the right thing to do? And they weren't asking that question. So as soon as I had that discussion with him, he just lit up and he goes, all right, I got your next job for you. And he said, I want you to write a leadership class. He knew my background as a counselor and a pastor. He said, I don't want to ever have to fire anybody on this base for that reason again. I want you to teach into it. That thing you just told me just now, I want you to write a course, and I'm gonna order people to come to it. So I thought, okay, fine. So I did. I put together a class that I honestly thought half the people would hate, because you know what sensitivity training is like, right? You kind of begrudgingly go there, like,
Yeah,
I
you're
have to go,
ordered to go.
and I have to sit here, and somebody's gonna wag their finger at me. So I already knew the perception going in, but I designed something completely different. This was leadership training, not sensitivity training. And the mandate I got over the years, not only from that Commodore, but several admirals afterwards, was to write a course of leadership training that taught into issues at home as well as issues at work. Because they were saying this, and this is true. If a sailor's failing at home, he's going to bring that to work with him. And conversely, if he's failing at work, he's going to take that home with him. So there is an interconnection between the two, and we have to pay attention to both. And the other thing was, sailors naively believe when they go home and they take their uniform off, that somehow they're off duty, and you're not, right? It's a 24/7 gig in the military. And you were a captain, I was a commander. An E2 or an 06, the general public really doesn't know the difference between us. They all know it's a Navy guy in a uniform, or a gal for that matter. And so we're all kind of lumped in together. We're all interconnected. So I wrote a course, and he started sending people to it. And then the reaction was what caught everybody off guard, because, as you know, you hand out a course critique after every class. And when people turn it over and write on the back, it's usually, make this stop. This is
Yeah.
horrible. Don't do this to me again. Right? It was the exact opposite. People loved the class. They felt like they were getting invested in as a human being in their personal lives.
Yeah.
Without being meddled with. They thought that they were getting training that would make them better as a sailor. And in addition to that, so the number one comments I got over the years were, could you make the course longer? Right? Could I come back again?
Right.
And can I bring my family back? And the next time? So we tried to accommodate all those things. We told people, if you want to come back and take it again, if you want to bring family members, do that.
Yeah.
There's a guy named Sean Buck, who I think Sean was the commandant of the
The Naval
Academy
He was, yeah.
just recently.
Yeah.
He had me in several times down in Jacksonville to teach the course. He came, sat through it 3 times himself, and brought his daughters with him a couple of times. So he's a big fan of the course.
Oh,
Yep.
that's awesome. Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. And then the impact that you had doing that, I mean, so you just didn't do it on the wing in Jermaine then you started traveling around and doing it at that point.
So word started getting out about the course, and then it was all word of mouth. So I'd get an email, or I'd get a phone call from a skipper or a Commodore saying, hey, can you come and teach the course, and when can you come? So I was able to work that around my airline schedule and my pastoring schedule very effectively, because I'd say, well, I got these 2 days next month, take it or leave it. And they'd say, yeah, come on in. And then I loved it because I got treated like a VIP every place I went.
Yeah.
So
here's our instructor. Yes. Who's flown in from
Maine. The
Maine.
rewarding part was the sailors, and they really responded well to this class. And that was the most rewarding part of it, was I still have some relationships all these years later from people that went through the course.
Well, that's actually outstanding. I mean, that just goes to show you how much of an impact that you had on someone's life. Yeah.
Correct. Right.
Yeah. And it also takes, it could take 30 seconds. It could be an hour. It doesn't have to be a lifetime of someone's impact. It could be instantaneous.
Right. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
wow,
But that's another thing I backed into. There I was sitting in the Commodore's office, hoping to hand in a report. And, 20 minutes later, I'm on a new trajectory.
so what, so you said you were balancing reserve time with American, that church kind of goes to the wayside off to somebody else. And then this is around the 2001 timeframe, you said?
That's when the course started. So I taught the course on active duty, well, as a reservist until 2011 timeframe. I stepped down from the church in 2010. So in 2010, all I had was American and the course, which was nice. It was a nice relief to the schedule. 2012, I retired from the reserves. I thought the course was done, but then your boss, Kyle Kozad, was an admiral, 1-star and then a 2-star. And he called me up one day and said, "Hey, I really like that course you taught. Are you still teaching it?" And I said, "Well, I'm a civilian now. If you want to have me in, yeah, sure." And so he started to make some arrangements, some other guy. And so that as a civilian now, I kept teaching the class. I taught it for free. I didn't get paid. They pay for a hotel room and a rental car, but that was about it. I just did, it was a give back to all that the Navy gave me all those years.
That's very impressive. Take, except all that personal time to be able to do that and still, pay it forward. That's amazing. So let's go back a little bit to, like I said, turn of the century, I guess, 2000. So where are you at now in the American Airlines arena?
So I'm a first officer on 767s. I was based in Boston. Started the church in 2000 up in Maine. And then probably, and your audience is going to go, "There's more?" Yeah, there's more. There's more. Probably the biggest single event in my life took place, and everybody's going to recognize this in a second when you set it up. But on September 11th, 2001, my life, my family's life, everything changed.
How does that affect you today? Now, does it still?
Well, sure, it does. And so, to give everybody the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say, as a pilot for American Airlines, I was based in Boston, and the first airplane that was hijacked on September 11th was based in Boston. And I was bidding reserve in those days to do the church and the Navy. The first flight that got hijacked was American Airlines Flight 11. It was a really nice flight. It was an early morning departure, 7:30, I think, in the morning to Los Angeles. Stay over in Los Angeles, come back the next day. I was on reserve, and that trip was in open time, as they say at the airlines. There was no co-pilot assigned to that trip. I had been looking at it for a few days. I think the Thursday or Friday before 9/11, it was in open time. I totally expected somebody to pick that trip up because it was such a nice trip. Stayed in open time all the way through the weekend. And then when Monday rolls around, the 10th of September, then they assign it to a reserve pilot. And so I looked on Monday, it was still open. I knew I was going to get the trip because I was the only guy on call. And so that's pretty simple math, right? They're going to give it to me. So at 3:00 in the afternoon, I did what I always do. I went to check to see if the open time had been filled. Sure enough, that trip, Flight 11 to Los Angeles, had been filled. I was the first officer on it. I told my wife, I said, "It looks like I'm going to Los Angeles tomorrow." I packed my bags, I set my alarm clock, and I waited for the phone to ring. So that's the last step in the process. The computer can assign your name to it, but a real person then is going to call you, usually within about 30 minutes, to say, "Hey, Steve, I want to let you know you got a trip tomorrow." And then at that point, it's a done deal. What was taking place simultaneously to that was this. Tom McGinnis, another FO at American Airlines, a Top Gun trained guy, by the way, Navy background. Tom was celebrating his 42nd birthday, I believe it was, with his wife and his children. He had been looking at the trip. He was a line holding pilot, so he could have grabbed it any time. I was a reserve pilot. I couldn't. But he passed on it right up until that last minute. And he looked at it and he thought, "You know what? I'm just going to look one more time because maybe I want to pick up some extra pay." So he called and he went in the computer. He saw my name had been assigned to it, but there's a little code next to my name that says they haven't called yet. So he picks up the phone real fast, calls down to scheduling, says, "Hey, is it too late? Can I still get that trip?" They say, "Well, yeah, you can still get it, but you got to let us know." So he talks to his wife, calls him back, says, "Yeah, I'll take the trip." So at that moment, they erase my name off the trip and never call me. They put his name on the trip. They've got him on the phone. That's a done deal. Later on that night, on the 10th, I went to the computer because they never called. And I thought, well, what happened? So I went back and I logged in. Some other guy's name was on the trip. All right, I don't care. I get paid to stay home or go to work. So, and it's no big deal. This happens all the time in the airlines, like constantly it happens. So the next day I put my Navy uniform on because I was working on this core values course that I was writing. And I went into work at my desk at the Navy base. And of course, 9/11 is happening in front of us. And we're in the Commodore's office, all watching it on the TV. Everybody's kind of semi-stunned with what's going on. I never connected the dots because they kept talking about American Flight 11. It didn't register with me that was a flight I was supposed to be on.
No kidding, really?
Yeah. And so we were so busy that day with contingencies and where we're going to war and what was going to happen to the world. And later on that night, 7:00 that night, I finally got home and I went to the computer to see if I could bring up the names of the crew members at American on that flight, because I'm sure I would have known some of them. And when I brought the screen up in front of me, it was the exact same screen I had seen the day before when it had my name listed on it, except now all the names are removed. And all it says on that screen is sequence failed continuity, which is a cryptic message, meaning the flight never made it to its destination. And when I saw the screen, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I said, "Oh my word, that's the flight I was supposed to be on today." I packed my bags for that flight. And I'm just sitting there staring at the screen, and my wife came around the corner and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Remember I told you I was going to Los Angeles today?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "That was the first airplane that got hijacked this morning." And that's it's a moment, right? It's hard to describe that moment. We just kind of hugged each other for a little bit. Didn't really say anything. All these years later, you get on an interview and somebody asks you, "How did you feel?" There's just an empty space, Ryan, where a feeling should be. And I can't describe it. It's just a hole. Because you can't be angry. You can't be sad. It's just, there's a missing place.
Yeah, you can't be necessarily
Can't be
relieved
relieved.
because someone else
just
was in that spot.
Yeah, you search for a feeling. And, so 10 years after that, we made a documentary out of my story. And I got asked by the documentary maker, why do you think God spared your life?
Mhm.
That's an even better question.
It is.
And it's not as simple as, God left one and took another, or he wanted to do more with me than he wanted to with Tom. That's not what happened here. All I know for certain is I was the one left behind. And with that comes an obligation, right? You've got an obligation to not go back to what you would call a normal life. You've got to make the most out of the rest of your life. For me, it's making the most out of my relationship with God and furthering the kingdom of Jesus Christ. For others, it might be something slightly different, but I live every day with a sense of purpose and passion because I know that every day on this earth is a gift from God. I'm living on borrowed time, and I can mark on the calendar September 11th, 2001, when I started living on borrowed time. So, am I driven? Am I passionate about stuff? Yeah. And part of it tracks back to that major life event of September 11th.
Mm-hmm. I could, I guess, equate it to someone who, had a near death experience, or maybe who was resuscitated after having a heart attack or in an accident of some way. And you live your life differently every day from that day forward. At least you hope you do.
Traveling around with that In My Seat film, that's, if anybody wants to look it up on YouTube, it's called In My Seat. It's only 15 minutes long. It's a very good documentary. I travel around with that film and I tell the story. And then people come up afterwards, and I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people that had a near-death experience, something that they got close to, and they can mark on their calendar. No offense to you as a helicopter pilot, but I've probably talked to 100 people, no kidding, that were supposed to get on a helicopter and they didn't, and the helicopter crashed.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, I maybe second thoughts about whether I ever want to go on a tour of the Hudson River.
Well, yeah, I know. Well, just a few months ago.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean,
no.
every time I see something like that, it reminds me of those 100 people I've talked to that should have been there, but they weren't.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. What did, how at the time, how many children did you have at that time?
So we had 7 children at the time. We ended up with 8. Number 8's a great story. Talk about backing into things
for a different podcast.
Yeah. For seven birth children, we adopted number 8 and he's great. So the answer is, wasn't 7 enough? Apparently not.
Yeah.
We went out and bought number 8.
Yeah.
8's enough. It is.
We went out and bought number 8. Well, yep. It's great. That's a good one. When did, at what age Well, when did you start talking about this incident with your children and your family, explaining this, to them? And did they understand the impact that it had upon your life?
So most of the older ones kind of lived through it, and they had a sense of
Okay.
what was going on because they're watching the images on TV like
They're
everybody
old
else
enough at
is.
that time.
They were old enough. Now, the
Okay.
younger ones, I had some that were too young to kind of comprehend it, but because of not the fallout, that's not the right word, because of the progression of my life after that, where I was constantly talking about it, it's almost like Groundhog Day. They had to live through 9/11 over and over and over again. Where's dad going? Oh, he's going on a trip to talk about his 9/11 story. Oh, they'd be in a church with me and we would show the film. So as they were growing up, they've probably seen the In My Seat film 50 times, those kids. So they saw the story and then we would talk about it. And every once in a while, now they're all adults, we'll have a kind of a candid conversation about how they felt at the time as a child, which is kind of nice. It's very revealing and healthy, I think, as an adult to say, well, how did you process that as a kid? And sometimes the naivety of childhood and the innocence protects you. The ones that were right on the cusp and a little bit older, they did wrestle with the fact that they could have lost their dad, but obviously they didn't, and so they're grateful, that they didn't.
Right. Um, what was the other question I was going to ask? Did you feel like my father was a Vietnam vet, Marine rifleman, and Purple Heart wounded, combat wounded there, and he came home, got out of the Marine Corps in 1968, and it was never one of those things in our house to where he never spoke about his time in the Marine Corps or what he experienced there, and I think that, and he still stayed connected to his Marine Corps buddies who lived through that, and even went to his former unit. They had reunions, and actually I went to a couple of them with him. And so did you find that the talking about it was helpful to you to process it? Because some people don't want to talk about it. Obviously you did. Your passion and your character, your energy that you has shows, that, yeah, hey, this is something you want to deal with and not push into the broom closet and just have it, stir in there. So did you make it a point to always talk about it, or just happened that's the way it was and you talked about it?
Yeah, 100%. I think it depends on how you're wired and what your personality is. Everybody's going to deal with something like that a little bit differently. If I was more of an introvert, I might have kept it more to myself and more introspective. I'm absolutely a verbal guy, as you can tell. I love to talk, and that's the way I process things. And all of my kids, by the way, we've all had various tragedies throughout life. My adult kids have had their own set of tragedies and things that are, real life happens all the time. And we'll be sitting around in a waiting room at a hospital or, some emergency room someplace and rallying the troops together. And then invariably one of my adult kids will tell a joke. And it's not an off-color joke. It's just something to lighten the mood. And then we all look at each other and we get a laugh and we look at each other and we go, oh, we should be ashamed. We shouldn't be laughing right now. But
Uh-huh.
I think some families, that's the way they process it. Like the reality of what's going on right now is a little too heavy and they try to lighten up the mood. That's just the way we do it. And it works. And other people wouldn't understand it, but it works for us as well. For me, it's talking about it. You're right. It might be a generational thing. My stepfather was in World War II and he made the landing at Omaha Beach and he was
Wow.
a corporal in one of those early waves. So he only ever told me one story. But he said, and it's funny because those guys wouldn't talk about it. He said he was in the landing craft. He was back towards the back of the landing craft where the bosun's mate was driving the ship. And he said everybody was peeking up over the top to see what was going on. And he said, I noticed several of the landing craft, the bosun's mates were panicking before they hit sand and they'd stop short and they'd open up the gate. And if they opened up the gate in deep water, everybody would push from the back. And all those guys with those 80-pound backs and their rifles and everything,
Mm-hmm.
they go right to the bottom.
And drowned. Yeah.
And they either drowned or they got shot in the water. And the only story he told me is he said, I took my 45 out of my holster and I stuck it under the guy's chin. And I said to him, you drive this thing until you hit sand or I pull this trigger. And that was it. And, if you saw the first 10 minutes of Saving Private Ryan, you know why he didn't want to talk about anything after that.
Mm-hmm.
He was a guy who lived through that, right?
Yeah.
But he told me that and I thought, well, that's real war for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You and I lived through a much more sanitized sort of peacetime thing. I'm not sure I wanted to trade places with him, but he got the job done. And they hit sand, and everybody hit the beach. So,
wow.
yeah. And he survived World War II.
Thank goodness.
Yep.
Yes, thank goodness. So, if you don't mind, I'll tell you my 9/11 story real quick. Yeah, not as compelling necessarily as yours, but I was actually on deployment. I was actually on my second deployment on the USS Enterprise, and we had just pulled out of, I think it was Dubai, UAE, and the Gulf, and we were going south. We were actually heading home, and we had this. I had a scheduled port call for South Africa, Cape Town, South Africa, and we were so excited because we were going to go do the shark cage diving, and then we could. That didn't happen. I was on duty. I was the SDO, squadron duty officer, that day in the morning from 06 to noon. I went back to my stateroom after eating lunch, and then the guy who relieved me, who was my roommate, Rob Hawthorne, called me up, said, "Dude, turn the TV on," and got to see the second, plane, go in, and could feel the boat actually turn around just like that and just start screaming off towards Pakistan and 100 miles off Pakistan. And 3 weeks later, OEF started dropping bombs, in Afghanistan. So yeah, it was, I got, extended in our deployment. And the funny thing too is that when I interviewed Sturls Gillum, who's the director of the museum here, he was on that same deployment with me. So yeah, like I said, small Navy.
Yeah, and your life changes in an instant, and you go from the world of, I don't know if that's when you grew up, but you went from that world of training and kind of, something might happen out there that we're training for, to somebody flipped the switch and all of a sudden it's real, and you're steaming off there, and pretty soon you're going to start taking live ordnance, dropping bombs, doing the real thing. And it's, but we are the best trained, best equipped military on the planet. And let me just share one thought on that, because in the course I taught, that leadership class, I said, we talked about trust, and trust being such an important component to leadership. And the reason that our military is the most effective military that's ever walked the face of the earth is because we train people and we trust them with the mission. We don't micromanage them. The Soviets used to send a political officer on every ship so the skipper wouldn't steal the ship and sell it to somebody, right? We don't do that here. We trust lieutenants with multi-million-dollar airplanes and bombs and a mission to go out and adapt and overcome and get it right. That is absolutely devastating. Every other major, the Chinese, the Soviets, the Russians, everybody else, they have a central command and control climate. Unless the guy in the Kremlin is saying do it, the people out in the field don't have the freedom. It's just the opposite with us. We get given a mission, stay within the parameters, go get it done. And that's worked out very effectively over all these years.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Decentralized command and control, that's the Navy's strength for sure. That was born, back in the 1800s, we were first starting, that, has been constrained a little bit today by technology, but you're right. It is the basis of how well we do our job in the Navy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And to harken back to anti-submarine warfare, soon thereafter, when we went off the coast of Pakistan, we didn't know what Pakistan was going to do, and they have submarines. So we actually flew around with live Mark 46 torpedoes, actually, for a few weeks, because we just didn't, we didn't know the situation at that time. So yeah,
the Mark 46, is that the 98-pound weakling? Was that torpedo?
It was the airborne. Yes, it was the airborne torpedo. And the Mark, oh my gosh, I can't even admit this. The Mark 50 was the larger airborne air-launched torpedo.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Mark 46
the Mark
and Mark
46
50.
we called it the 98-pound weakling because it had 98 pounds of explosives in it.
Yeah.
And you'd get the job done, but
Yeah,
it
was scare them.
It wasn't like a 10 kiloton, whatever,
No, definitely not.
You would get the job done.
Definitely not. Well, we're getting close to finishing time here, but I do want to hear kind of about American Airlines a little bit more, and how you've progressed through your career there. So you said you're a 7.6 FO. I assume you moved to captain after that, possibly line check airman after that as well. But now you're a 777 captain. So, and are you still based out of Logan, or how has that progressed now?
So I'm based in Charlotte now. So my 3 bases were New York, Boston, and then down to Charlotte. I live in North Carolina. I would have loved to have done the check airman thing. I love instructing. I love being a teacher. But because of when I get hired in my career progression, I was mostly a career first officer. I did that for almost 30 years. Just because at one point I got some quality of life and I enjoyed it. So I went from the right seat of the 7.6 to the right seat of the 777, which was a good pay raise and really great quality of life. And I stayed there until I could go to the left seat of the 777. So I've been doing that for about the last 5 years. Really love being a captain on the 7.6 or on the 777. I've got 2 months to go, and then I time out at age 65, and then it's full-time Captain Steve all the time.
Oh,
That's going to be my next job.
Is the world ready for that?
I don't know. We're going to find out. But so people are wondering, is Captain Steve going to go away when I retire? No. In fact, I'm going to get more time to do Captain Steve, and we've got a lot of great ideas.
Is that right? So not going to fly for a non-age restricted business afterwards, hanging up the wings for the final time?
I might have done that had Captain Steve not come along, but Captain Steve is a full-time gig, and we've got more things that we want to do with it. So we're trying to expand the channel. We're gonna roll over and have some additional channels as well. So the hope is kind of a network of aviation related and some other issues, some other spinoffs as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm excited for that.
Yeah,
I can't wait for it. I'm addicted.
You guys are getting your feet wet in this venue. So again, all the best to you, and I hope your channel continues to grow.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. It was I've been listening to podcasts for quite a few years, probably since like 2009, 2010 timeframe. I always wanted to kind of start my own, and then when I got down here to the foundation, I pitched it to KC when I was interviewing, and the VP had always wanted to start one as well. And just happened to back into that too. And lo and behold, it was a marriage made right then, and we finally got it off the ground. So, but and hopefully it still keeps on going up, especially with great guests like yourself, because like I tell people, great guests shadow a poor host. So yeah, I just need more of
that's
you,
kind.
which is great.
Hey, you mentioned your boss KC. Have you interviewed him yet?
He doesn't really want to do it in front of a camera interview.
Okay.
Well, keep working
That's
on
fair
him.
enough.
Keep working on him.
Right.
He wrote an awesome book, Relentless Positivity. And he does obviously a lot of fundraising and getting out and about, for the foundation. And maybe in the future we'll be able to get him on here. And
he's got all my admiration and respect. He's a terrific guy on every level you can think about that.
For sure. I totally concur. All right. Well, again, sir, thank you very much for your time, your stories, your insight. And I hope that the listeners and watchers here can really get something from it that, as you said, maybe isn't as dramatic as a 9/11 story, but maybe it makes them appreciate their everyday life a little bit more to go out and do better. So,
absolutely. Thank you, Ryan, for having me on the program.
Yeah, you're welcome. What an incredible conversation with Captain Steve Scheibner, from Navy deployments to the Orion P-3 Orion to commanding the cockpit of a 777 to teaching the next generation of leaders about core values. Steve's life is a powerful reminder that aviation is only part of the mission. The real impact comes from the character, discipline, and integrity we carry beyond the flight line. Steve has shown us that the same principles that guide us in naval aviation, teamwork, honor, courage, commitment, can transform families, churches, and communities. His story proves that leadership doesn't end when the flight hours stop. It continues every day in the way we live and serve. On behalf of the Naval Aviation Radio Podcast, I'm Ryan Keys. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay sharp, stay ready. We'll keep pushing the limits of what it means to lead. Thank you for joining us on this flight through history and innovation here at the Ready Room. We hope today's episode inspired you with new insights and the incredible stories that make naval aviation so extraordinary. If you enjoyed the journey, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with your network. It helps us reach more listeners like you. Don't forget to visit the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida, or explore our online resources at navalaviationmuseum.org to dive deeper into the stories we've shared. Follow us on social media for updates behind-the-scenes content, and a sneak peek at upcoming episodes. Until next time, thanks for listening to Ready Room. See you on the next flight.